2017 has gone by in the blink of an eye, and when the time came to plan our Game of the Year videos, my first thought was, I feel like I've played barely anything this year. But then I realised that's just the goldfish memory talking. 2017 has actually been a brilliant year for games. I've spent countless hours hunting shrines in Breath of the Wild and Power Moons in Super Mario Odyssey. Sorry, that's Power Moons. Don't think for a second I haven't been clocking all those accent jibes in the comments. I've been playing a ton of PUBG and not gotten any better at it. Been obsessed with Dream Daddy and Life is Strange Before the Storm, and lost literal days of my life to my first experience with a Persona game, Persona 5. Plenty of, if not all of these games, I'm still actually playing. And in their individual ways, any of these titles I would happily consider my Game of the Year. But I sort of had to choose the game I wanted to talk about today because of how much the series means to me. It launched at the very start of 2017, which, by the way, feels like 100 years ago, and breathed new life into a franchise many felt long dead. I'm talking, of course, about Resident Evil 7.
Sleep well, darling?
I'll admit that when Resident Evil 7 was first announced, I was skeptical. Capcom didn't have the best track record of late with the direction of the series, and duds like Umbrella Corps were still very fresh in my memory. Besides, the more we saw of 7 in previews, the less it seemed connected to the established Resident Evil lore. And yet, having now actually played the game, that was really one of the smartest things Capcom could have done.
No! Don't go!
I've been a fan of Resident Evil for a long time. I was really too young to be playing the earlier games when I first did, but I've played pretty much all RE games since, many times over, and they've come to hold a very special place in my heart, though that could just be the T-virus setting up camp in my circulatory system.
There are only 3 STARS members left now. Captain Wesker, Jill, and myself.
The first games were super camp as well as scary, the zombie slaying interspersed with iconic moments both bizarre and darkly funny. Literally anything Barry Burton says, Jill Valentine throwing herself out of a moving train headfirst in Resident Evil 3, these are the moments I tend to remember even more than the boss battles. The games were a slow burn, and there were a lot of quiet moments while you figured out your next move forward. You had to actually like the characters you were stuck in a mansion or a lab or a police station with. But as great and important as all those memories are to me, something had to change. The fixed camera, slow-paced backtracking of the original games was all of a time and place. Resident Evil 4 reinvented not just the series with third-person shooters as a whole, yet it proved to be a dramatic turning point for Resident Evil in that every game that followed after had to go bigger and bigger on guns, action and spectacle, until there we were, punching boulders in an active volcano and literally jumping the zombie shark. Future titles needed fresh ideas and a fresh perspective, and the perspective Capcom went for was first person, which I think was exactly the right decision. Because despite a more modern first person camera angle, Resident Evil 7 is the most genuine Resident Evil experience I've played for years. It just feels right. A dilapidated old house, weird and impractical puzzles, a shortage of ammo and resources, and long stretches where your only company is your slowly mounting sense of dread. It was claustrophobic in all the right ways. It was real, scary horror, where you felt vulnerable and like you never knew what was coming next. The Bakers were real monsters, not just screeching caricatures that force you to shoot at glowing orange weak spots over and over and over again. And you know, I genuinely think my favourite parts of the game are the VHS tapes and the bedroom DLC, where you don't fight anything, but instead rely solely on your wits. That, to me, feels like real Resident Evil. Throw in a cheesy one-liner and we may as well be back at the Spencer Mansion.
Bring it on, bitch. I got something for you.
That said, I totally understand that literally every Resident Evil fan has a different opinion on what makes a game worthy of the title Resident Evil. Is it the survival horror? Or is it the more recent swing into so-called action horror? Some people actually miss the action of the later games and the sheer variety of enemies that came with them. Zombie T-Rex, anyone? But for me personally, the heart of Resident Evil lay in the atmosphere, the tension, the never knowing when a zombie dog would come crashing through a window. And it's also the satisfaction in figuring out a particularly difficult puzzle, hearing that click as the path beyond unlocks. It felt to me like Resident Evil understood that, and understood the very real dread you feel as a character that isn't a hero like Chris Redfield, the feeling that you can and will die. I liked the fact that it reset Resident Evil's sense of scale too. As executive producer Jun Takeuchi told me when I spoke to the team back in November last year, he realised that with Leon Kennedy and Chris Redfield, players were too empowered. They couldn't really feel dread because they were essentially a one-man army. And he knew that with those characters you could only go bigger. Taking the series back to an isolated swamp with an unknown character brought that vulnerability back. That's not to say Resident Evil 7 was perfect. I would have liked a little more enemy variation and perhaps a bit more to its story than falling back on the old trope of creepy little girl has sinister mind control powers because of evil corporate meddling. I wouldn't have cared if we'd never left the Baker compound. And I wish it didn't feel like certain aspects of the story have been held back for later iterations. But as an overall experience, 7 makes me excited for the future of Resident Evil. At the time of making this video, the Chris Redfield Not a Hero DLC has yet to launch, and maybe that'll answer some questions we have about the ending to the main game, or it'll have us asking entirely new questions about where the series goes next. Either way though, the future of one of my favourite franchises looks a lot brighter than it did a year ago. I want to just take a second to say thank you so much to everyone who watched our channel over the last year. To everyone who subscribed or left a lovely comment or pressed that thumbs up button, it really means a lot, and we hope you'll stick around into the new year. Keep your eyes out this week for the rest of the team's games of the year, plus some other fun stuff, and we will see you in 2018. Thanks for watching. Bye!
See? Very impressive, my friend. Very impressive. Let's just see how impressive you really are.
You're going to need to proceed with caution. Extreme caution.
Oh, well, that's different. Like it haven't been since we got here.